TikTok, time to rock. Good evening, good morning, good afternoon to everyone who's watching from all over the world. We are half an hour earlier than we normally are because Robert has another show tonight at 9 o'clock. Robert, what are you doing at 9 o'clock? I can always add the link later, but what's going on?
I'm talking to Joseph Arthur on TNT Radio. And I got to say, if you are a fan of Jihad and a fan of folk music, you should tune in. Because last week I was on Joseph Arthur's show at 10 o'clock. So there was no conflict with our This Week in Jihad episode. But Joseph Arthur totally blew me away with a song about the truth about Muhammad, sung on and accompanied on his guitar as we were doing the show. It was a remarkable thing, ladies and gentlemen. I can't guarantee that we're going to get more music tonight, but tune in to find out.
Wait, so he played you something he recorded, or he was actually just singing it live?
He was singing it live.
Wow.
It was as real as you can get.
That is as real as anything can possibly be. So, I know I'm a fan of Jihad, so and of folk music. Imagine
you're going to want to tune in, David.
Oh man, who's that folk singer from the 70s that you like?
That I like?
Yeah.
Bob Dylan?
Bob Dylan. There we go. Yeah, he went like hardcore Christian for a while and made some gospel albums and stuff.
Yeah, those are great too.
And so, imagine Bob Dylan becoming counter jihad and then making a bunch of songs about Muhammad. That'd be pretty funny.
Yeah, I wouldn't be holding my breath on that. But you never know. You never know with Bob. That's the one thing that you can say about the man's whole career. You never know.
Oh man, he could totally rewrite like a Rolling Stone to be about, someone getting stoned. Hey, speaking of someone getting stoned, we've got some what? What's
Everybody Must Get Stoned. That's one of his other songs.
Yeah.
It's actually called Rainy Day Women, number 12 and 35. But it goes, Everybody Must Get Stoned.
Everybody must get stoned. I remember that one. Yeah, wow. I could actually probably do a parody of that one.
Yeah, there you go.
Yeah, actually
Next,
sucks.
it is about actual stoning. It's not actually about being high on drugs.
Is it?
That's correct. It's about being stoned with actual rocks.
Ouch.
Yes.
And that actually sucks because that still happens today, doesn't it?
Yes, it does, David. And in fact, we have several stories of that nature this week. I think that actually this is a week that we could actually devote at least half, maybe the whole hour, to activities in one country and revolving around one event.
I'm guessing Nigeria?
That is correct. And this is because there was, of course, this one paradigmatic incident and then multiple reverberations therefrom. And so we can start with the incident itself, a very terrible incident of a Christian student at Shehu Sagari College of Education in Wamako, who was accused of blasphemy. But what actually had happened was that she had asked the Muslim students to stop posting dawah on the school bulletin board that was supposed to be for homework assignments and whatever else, housekeeping details about the school. And they were enraged and accused her of blasphemy and beat her savagely and ultimately burned her alive. A terrible story. Really, the horror of this cannot be minimized. And that's just the beginning. That incident in itself would be enough. But
and especially since the entire thing and the aftermath was all recorded and posted online because they were apparently quite proud of what they did, just like Ali Dawa would be proud of that.
Right. And they were proud also of the fact that this was something where they had overpowered the security forces at the school who were protecting Ms. Samuel after the initial threats were made. And this mob was able to defeat in armed, well, actually, I don't know if they were armed with weaponry, but in any case, they were able to fight the security forces and overcome them to gain access to her. And this, of course, demonstrates the savagery, the determination, the unwillingness to be deterred that we so often see with Islamic jihadis. Interestingly enough, a few days after the event, a great deal has happened in the fallout from this, but one of the things was that her last words were revealed as the mob started to do the things that it did. She asked a very simple question: what do you hope to achieve with this? And I think that that's extraordinary. You know, what do you hope to achieve with this is a question that has a whole lot of resonance in many contexts. And in this case, I think people should ponder what they hoped to achieve with this. And most of the time when this kind of thing is reported, people are in shock at the savagery of the attack, and they don't stop to think, well, what exactly are they trying to do? And this is worthwhile for non-Muslims to ponder and to recognize that, well, you have an incident like this. What are the Muslims trying to do? In the first place, they are trying to make sure that there are no insults of this kind that ever happen again. But let's remember, she wasn't even insulting. She said, is it by force that you guys will always be sending this religious stuff in this group? The group wasn't created for that, but rather as a notice for tests, assignments, exams, etc., not these nonsense religious posts. That's all she said. So probably the word nonsense is what set it all off. And now the signal has been given to other Christians, because she was a Christian woman, other Christians in Nigeria and Christians anywhere else, as well as Jews, Buddhists, Hindus, what have you. You don't ever say anything negative in any context of any kind, no matter how mild, about Islam, Muhammad, the Quran, whatever, or even dawah attempts on a school message board. Or you could be horribly killed. And that's what they were trying to do. What they are trying to do, in short, is strike terror in the hearts of the enemies of Allah, as chapter 8, verse 60 of the Quran directs.
And the real crazy part is, so you'd think, okay, suppose some guys find her, which again isn't explicitly blasphemous or anything else like that. She's saying, hey, come on, you guys you're posting a bunch of religious posts here. Stop this nonsense. You'd think, okay, given the nature of, let's call that an infraction, which she's just making what I would regard as a perfectly valid point. Like, even if Christians were posting, and she was a Christian, and Christians started posting a bunch of stuff, hey, this isn't what this forum is about, so can you stop with all these posts and so on. But it's not like someone reports her, complains about her, says some mean things about her, or even walks up and like hits her in the face or something. She has to be stoned and set on fire. And then you've got all these, afterwards, you've got all these guys who are bragging about it, posting videos, and leaders in Nigeria, leaders of mosques in Nigeria, posting on Twitter saying, this is what you get. This is what you get if you criticize our religion in this way. And it's just amazing, because it's the same situation over and over and over again. If someone were to attack a Muslim, and then other people were to justify it and say he got what he deserved, they'd be banned instantly. But the Muslim leaders are free to brag about and warn other people, this is what you'll get. if you criticize our prophet or if you blaspheme our prophet and so on. And so it's just it's the horrible nature of what they did to her, given even if you thought even if you thought she was wrong for what she said or something like that, given the extent to punish her that they went to, that's one thing. But then it's the hypocrisy that always follows that. Like, you're free to brag about what you've done. You're free to use that to continue to threaten people into silence. You're fine with that. You're fine with that on YouTube. You're fine with that on Facebook. You're fine with that on Twitter. But you're routinely banned if you criticize that sort of thing. And so it's, you could say, hey, in Nigeria, they'll stone and burn you. Whereas, here in the West, they'll just, attack your reputation and make fun of you and get you canceled from social media. But it is interesting how the entire world is basically on the same page when it comes to not saying anything bad about Muhammad.
Yeah, everybody is intimidated. They traffic in intimidation and fear. And it seems as if the whole world has decided we're not going to stand up to intimidation. We're going to let them bully us and frighten us, and we're going to cave in and give them what they want, which means we're only going to get more intimidation. But it's also noteworthy, those people that you were noting, the officials who are saying this was great. We have discussed over many weeks, David, how this kind of thing progresses, and that you start out with a kind of a Meccan Islam in a country where you have a tiny minority of Muslims, and they're preaching tolerance and peace. But as the Muslim population grows, then you start getting more bellicose and forthrightly bellicose statements. And I think this is what we're also seeing now in Nigeria, that whereas a smaller population of Muslims might be saying, can't we all just get along and let's be tolerant and treat one another with kindness and so on, based on the Meccan demands for tolerance, which are actually not calls for tolerance on the part of the Muslims, but tolerance for the Muslims as a minority. But in any case, tolerance nonetheless. But then you move to another stage. You move to a Medinan stage of warfare. And it starts out, of course, as defensive. And so think about that. Consider that in light of the statement from Ibrahim Makari, Imam of the National Mosque of Abuja. Now, that's a very considerable position. Abuja is a major city in Nigeria, and he is the Imam of the National Mosque. So this is a major Muslim cleric in Nigeria, not some guy in a storefront or raving on a street corner. And he says, it should be known to everyone that we, the Muslims, have some red lines beyond which must not be crossed. The dignity of the Prophet is at the forefront of the red lines. If our grievances are not properly addressed, then you should not be criticized for addressing them ourselves. Now, this statement, incidentally, in light of what you're saying about social media, this is noteworthy, that this was posted on the guy's Twitter account. That what he's essentially doing is justifying a brutal murder, a brutal and unjust murder, and saying this was completely fine. That's striking enough in itself. And, you don't see Muslim spokesmen in the West ordinarily doing that. And I think that one reason, of course, is because the Muslim population in the West is so much smaller than it is in Nigeria. It's not, contrary to popular belief, because Muslims in the West have some different understanding of Islam that is tolerant and peaceful, and we're all just going to get along indefinitely. I mean, if that's true, then Muslims in the West have an Islam that we have never seen in history and has never existed before. What's much more likely is they hold exactly the same Islam as this Imam Ibrahim Makari holds in Nigeria. And when they gain sufficient numbers, they're going to start talking like he's talking now.
And this story didn't receive the same media attention that the the cartoon killings in France had, because it's Nigeria and journalists apparently just don't care as much about what goes on in Africa. But after the cartoon killings in France, it was interesting to watch the response from Muslim leaders and Muslim spokespeople around the world, because they all followed the exact same pattern. They would say, yes, while we condemn that attack, so we condemn the killing of that teacher for showing a Muhammad cartoon to prompt discussion in his classroom. We condemn that, but free speech doesn't mean free speech to hurt feelings. Free speech doesn't mean the freedom to offend. And so they're kind of showing, yeah, we are on the same page. You don't actually have the right to criticize or mock our prophet. You don't do that. You do not have the freedom to do that. So notice, I mean, they're saying, hey, we condemn that, but at the same time, they're justifying it. They're saying, hey, this guy never had the actual freedom to make fun of our prophet. You don't have that, which is just insane. Of course, we have the freedom to mock your prophet all we want, right? And if you say, hey, we should have laws that ban offensive speech, the first thing that would be banned would be the Quran, because that is massively offensive towards everyone in the entire world.
If the law is applied properly.
And including towards Muslims, because you have these verses in the Quran that actually call for fighting hypocrites and so on. And so these are verses that are used for one Muslim group to attack and kill and slaughter the members of another Muslim group that they regard as hypocrites for some reason. And so, but by the way, that was one of my videos that was banned by YouTube. It got me a hate speech strike after one of the cartoon killings. I made a very simple video. I posted the comments from popular Muslim leaders in the world, heads of state and so on, who were defending the killing of this teacher by saying free speech does not mean the freedom to offend. And I simply said, hey, if you actually believe that speech that offends certain people or offends large numbers of people has to be banned, then do you think we should ban the Quran? Because that is offensive. When you call Jews and Christians the worst of creatures, when you call for the violent subjugation of non-Muslims and fighting people until they pay the jizya, when your book calls for these things, that's very offensive. So should we ban that? Posted that. YouTube shut it down as hate speech. You literally cannot even suggest that there be consistency here. You can't even suggest it. In fact, I'm wondering if this is going to be banned because I made the same basic point. It's hypocritical to say ban your speech that I don't like, but don't ban my speech that you don't like.
It's great living in an insane world, really. But you're quite right. Anyway, there's plenty more of this. Of course, it's all in the same vein. Even a government official in Sokoto State in Nigeria, Anas Muhammad Sani, he said that more Christians will be murdered if they disrespect Muhammad. He said Muslims don't take insults against beloved prophet in whatever form. The earlier our Christian brothers and sisters understand this, the better for all of us. May the recklessness of our tongues never drive us to an early grave. Notice once again the displacement of responsibility. He's threatening to kill people if they insult his prophet, and then he says, may the recklessness of our tongues never drive us to an early grave. In other words, it's our fault if we get killed by him for saying something insulting to Muhammad. It's not his fault for being so savagely irrational as to want to murder someone for saying things he doesn't like. It's the same thing as blaming a woman for getting raped and saying she was asking for it because she wasn't wearing a hijab or she wasn't covered properly, which of course is exactly what is extrapolated from chapter 33, verse 59 of the Quran, which says that women must be veiled and so that they may not be molested, which opens up an inevitable corollary that a woman can be molested if she's not veiled.
Yeah, and the horrible part is that in places like Nigeria, where you have a ton of Christians and you have these leaders who actually mean what they say, and then you find out you don't have to run around actually saying, hey, Muhammad is the most obvious false prophet in history, he's a child molester, he's a rapist, he's a slave trading murdering rapist. You don't have to say these things. You just have to, hey, can we not be having this discussion in this message? But bam, even that is a death sentence. Or, of course, as we've seen over and over and over again, you don't have to actually do anything. You can just get into an argument with someone and they'll just falsely accuse you of saying something against Muhammad in order to have you brutally murdered. But notice the situation that, I mean, I saw an Open Doors report that said that now more Christians are being murdered for being Christians in Nigeria than in the rest of the world combined. But when you think about why that is, so you have places like the United States where Muslims are a tiny percentage of the population. And so officially, according to their religion, they're not in a position where they're supposed to go out and subjugate other people. And then you have other places like Pakistan and Egypt where Christians are completely dominated by the surrounding Muslims. And so they're not seen as much of a threat. But then you have places like Nigeria where the number of Christians and Muslims in a society are roughly equal. And so it's in the minds of the jihadis that Christians are this serious threat to Islam, that they could convert people and so on. And so it's they're in a constant state of emergency to avoid the population shifting towards a Christian majority. And so it's just a bloodbath. And lo and behold, you get the most dangerous place in the world for Christians there. And we get to look at it from outside, where the most that happens to us, we criticize jihad and they kick us off a platform or something like that. But the Christians over there, they're in a state of constant danger.
Yeah, and it's nationwide. There really isn't any safe place. I have many stories this week. It's been quite a terrible week for Christians in Nigeria. Quite aside from the terrible story of Deborah Samuel, we have Fulani herdsmen killed 8 Christians in Bassa County, Plateau State, after slaughtering at least 21 others in another area of the county. And this kind of thing goes on a more or less regular basis, in large part because the government is headed by a Fulani himself, Muhammadu Buhari, and there doesn't seem to be any will on the part of the government to rein in the Fulani jihadis and stop them from killing Christians.
But by the way, side note there, I've seen some criticisms suggesting that the government is actually complicit in these attacks because the government officials are Muslims and so on. And so, what are your thoughts on that? Do you think they just don't want to go against groups like Boko Haram when they are attacking Christians because they don't want to get on the bad side, and so they're basically cowards even though they'd like everyone to live in peace? Or do you think that they're actually behind the scenes rooting for them and then publicly doing nothing in order to make sure it happens?
Oh, I think they're definitely rooting for them. And there was a Nigerian government official. I have the stories in the Jihad Watch archives, but I don't have them pulled up for tonight because this was maybe a year or so ago. But he was openly praising the jihadis, and then was confronted and made the usual kinds of things, the usual kinds of excuses about being misquoted or taken out of context and all that, and the whole thing blew over. But not only did it seem clear to me that he does support the jihadis and just got caught saying so in a reckless moment, but also that others do as well. And that given the fact that the president is a Fulani and that there are so many Muslims in the government, it seems clear that there is considerable support for these jihad groups within the government. Otherwise, the government, they've been boasting about stopping these jihadis for years, and yet they never do. And they never even take any effective action. So either it's the weakest, most incompetent government in the world, maybe outside of ours, or they want this to go on, or perhaps some combination of the two. But there's no way that the Nigerian government conscientiously wants to stop the jihad in Nigeria.
Yeah, and as you pointed out earlier, it's the situation where you can't. I mean, you can't even protect a student on a campus because the students there will just completely overwhelm anyone who's trying to protect someone. So it's just they've got a license to kill. They got a license to kill in their country.
Exactly. And so, yeah, and also I should note, I quoted him already, but this state government official is, what's his name? Anas Muhammad Sani, who said that more Christians were going to get killed if they disrespected Muhammad and they better learn how to toe the line. Well, he's a government official, and there's no indication that he's been fired for saying this. And, where one guy speaks up, there are many others who believe the same thing and don't say anything. It's just like the proportion of the comments on this video versus the views. So it's pretty much certain that there are other government officials in Nigeria who believe the same things. Anyway, there is even more out of Nigeria, unfortunately. The Islamic State, ISIS, published a video this past week that was showing the murder of 20 Christians in Borno State in northeast Nigeria. And one of them spoke in the Hausa language. He said that this was to avenge the killing of the leaders of ISIS in the Middle East earlier this year. Now, David, those 20 Christians they killed did not actually murder the leaders of ISIS in the Middle East earlier this year. But ISIS is making an elaborate set of assumptions that are worth unpacking. They believe, in the first place, wrongly, that the West is a Christian entity. They also believe that the resistance they encounter is a crusade. And in fact, jihadis always refer to Western military forces and intelligence and security forces as crusaders. And so because they make these false assumptions, they capture any Christians anywhere, these random 20 Christians in Borno State in Nigeria, and they say, we're taking revenge by killing 20 of your people because you killed our leaders. Now, these poor guys in Nigeria, who knows if they even were aware that the ISIS leaders were killed. These were not stories that were massively publicized. And why would it matter to somebody in Borno State? Why would it matter to somebody anywhere outside of the ISIS leadership? So they just get these guys because they're Christians, and they assume that there's some massive Christian entity that is waging a crusade against them, which is actually not the case.
And the horrible, horrible, horrible part about that is, so we know that we have jihadis in Nigeria who will go to any excuse in order to justify killing a bunch of Christians. And it can be, here's something that happened in a completely different part of the world that had absolutely nothing to do with these Christians, but we're going to punish these Christians for something that someone else in a completely unrelated fashion did. Well, guess what? You can always do that, right? You can always walk up. They can always walk up, find a group of Christians and say, now we have to kill these Christians because what the United States did last week. We're going to go up. We found more. We're going to kill these guys for what France did last week. We're going to kill these Christians because someone shared a cartoon on the internet of Muhammad and it had nothing to do with these Christians, but we're going to slaughter them in the name of Allah. Sick ideology here.
Yeah, and it's interesting to note that I believe it's Saul Alinsky says, you always accuse your opponent of what you yourself are guilty of. And if anybody has mastered that, it's jihadis. Because you're talking about jihad in the United States, and I have so many times been accused of collectively blaming all Muslims for the actions of a few. I've never actually done this. I've never said all Muslims are responsible for jihad or for anything.
In fact, we often go out of our way to point out,
Yeah.
guys, we're not talking about all Muslims here. I've had plenty of Muslim friends over the
Mhm.
years. I've had Muslim friends that I would trust with my life. We're not talking about everyone. We're talking about the ideology and those people who are actually interpreting it in the way Muhammad meant, which plenty of Muslims don't. But you're right; that we get blamed. In fact, every time I go to the comment section, I see that. Right? I'll say, "Look,
Yeah.
these guys killed this guy," and the response is, "So now you're accusing all Muslims?" Like, are you
Where
able
did I
to
ever?
are you
Yeah.
able to read?
This-
Did you pass first grade comprehension? I mean,
Yeah. But the ironic part about it is that jihadis routinely do this.
mhm.
And what they're doing by killing these Christians in Nigeria who had nothing to do with the killing of their leaders is essentially saying that all Christians are responsible for this. And this kind of collective punishment and collective blaming is actually something that's very common among them. And so maybe that's why the accusation is so easy for them to make. It's ready to hand. More out of Nigeria. There was another terrible explosion, 9 people dead outside of a school in Kano State in the Sabon Gari area. And interestingly enough, the government said, oh, this was just a gas explosion, terrible accident. But eyewitnesses say that it was a suicide bomber. And of course, we know the Quran promises paradise to those who kill and are killed for Allah in chapter 9, verse 111. And so that seems to be an example of that. Interesting story also out of Sokoto as well. The cathedral, the Catholic cathedral, Holy Family Catholic Cathedral in Sokoto. Now, remember, it was in Sokoto that Deborah Samuel was brutally murdered. And so, what have Muslims been doing in response to that murder? Have they been inviting Christians over to their homes for a meal and asked to try to achieve some kind of good relationship with them to build the foundation that will prevent this kind of thing from happening again? No, a mob instead went to Holy Family Cathedral in Sokoto, broke the windows, vandalized a bus, proceeded to St. Kevin's Catholic Church in another part of Sokoto and set it on fire, went to a Catholic hospital complex under construction and shattered all the windows. Now, this is after a Muslim mob murdered a Christian woman. An enraged Muslim mob, perhaps enraged because Christians were upset about this, is going and attacking churches. Even worse, the Roman Catholic Bishop of Sokoto, Matthew Hassan Kuka, said, "This has nothing to do with religion. Christians have lived peacefully with their Muslim neighbors here in Sokoto over the years." Now, I don't know what Bishop Matthew Hassan Kuka is smoking, but this has everything to do with religion, and it doesn't do anybody any good to deny that or pretend it isn't the case.
Yeah, it seems like he's just trying to placate his opponents there. But it reminds me of things we've read about in places like Pakistan over the years, where people would rape a little Christian girl or something like that, and then if the family even thought about complaining to police about what would happen, it would just be a rampage against a Christian village. And so Christians have just been intimidated into silence over the atrocities committed against them. And that seems like the intent behind the aftermath in Nigeria. It's, yeah, we just killed someone, but we want you to understand that you're going to keep your mouth shut about it, and we'll just randomly attack anyone, attack churches and so on, until you get the point that whatever else happens, you better keep your mouth shut about this stuff.
And that's the classic dhimmi mentality, David. The Sharia mandates that the contract of protection, or the dhimma, is revoked if a Christian, quote, mentions something impermissible about Allah, Muhammad, or the Quran. And so the Christians who were dhimmis over the centuries in whatever country where they were, they learned never to complain. And if they were asked how the situation was for them, they would talk about how great it was. And, you know, I remember even my grandparents who grew up in the Ottoman Empire and were exiled for not converting to Islam, telling me how wonderful life was over there. And while I think life was probably wonderful over there until they got exiled, and their father murdered and so on. The other possibility, however, is that they were taught from a very early age never to say anything negative about the Muslim Turks in any context because it could get people killed.
And so you have that mentality going along for 14 centuries, where non-Muslims just have to keep their mouths shut about Islam. And all of a sudden we get to the age of the internet, and we get to the age where people from all over the world are interacting with one another on social media and so on. And then, shocker, the rest of the world doesn't think they have to follow these rules. And so what do? Well, you try to, you whine to the lords of speech, your tech CEOs. You gotta ban those, or feelings are being hurt. And freedom of speech is not freedom to offend. And the oppressors become the compulsive whiners. It's interesting.
Speaking of whining to the lords of speech, David, got a story out of Pennsylvania involving the Pennsylvania Senate race, the Republican primary there between Mehmet Oz, the famous TV doctor, who is a Muslim and a Turkish citizen, as well as a citizen of the United States, a dual citizen. And he is in a race that's actually still inconclusive, as far as I know, although it looks like he's going to win, against Kathy Barnett, who is somebody who has been criticized harshly in recent weeks for criticizing Islam. Because, of course, the establishment media hates when you do that. But what's noteworthy is I thought Dr. Oz's response was extraordinary. He actually said a couple of days ago that he thought that Barnett should be disqualified from running because she had criticized Islam and because she had spoken negatively about some things about Islam. And he said, imagine if you're a Democratic pollster and you're watching a woman that said openly homophobic statements and Islamophobic statements. He said this should be disqualifying, that she should be barred from running. And I thought, wait a minute, maybe Dr. Oz doesn't have a fully developed understanding of the freedom of speech in the West. Because disqualifying for criticizing Islam, we're not there yet. We may get there soon. But right now, you can criticize Islam or anything else you want and run for any office. And criticizing Christianity, of course, in some circles makes you a big hero. But criticizing Islam is way off limits.
Yeah, and that is interesting that, something would rule you out. It would be one thing to say, hey, you should not vote for someone who has these views or who speaks like that. You can always say that, hey, no one should vote for this person because of this person's views. That makes sense. But to have some sort of ideological requirements, you can't, if you've ever said something critical of Islam or something like that, you have to be barred. You have to be barred from any sort of public service. Those things always get creepy, ladies and gentlemen, because once you start, tossing in rules like that, you get two things. One, you either get people saying, okay, well, matter of fact, we're going to make a massive checklist of things that you can never, ever say. Or it means you are ruled out of public office, and they're just going to make rules about their opponents. Or what you'll do is you'll just accuse people of violating, any restrictions, even if they haven't. Right? It's just like on YouTube or Twitter or something like that. They'll make a rule against hate speech, and you don't actually have to violate the rule for them to say you violated the rule. And so, and that's why, as much of a problem as it is with the things people say, much more dangerous when you say, well, we're making rules that you can never say these kinds of things. Then you get in trouble because then who's making those kinds of decisions?
Indeed. And this is also noteworthy. Dr. Oz was exercised about Kathy Barnett because she said in a tweet in 2015, 7 years ago, pedophilia is a cornerstone of Islam. And he was actually enraged, but I thought, what are you talking about? You're enraged, you're a Turkish citizen. And Turkish Directorate of Religious Affairs, the Diyanet, said in 2018, not that long ago, that under Islamic law, girls as young as 9 can marry. And that's not even close to being the only modern Muslim cleric who has said that there's no age limit. Dr. Salih bin Fazwan, prominent cleric in Saudi Arabia, member of Saudi Arabia's highest religious council, said in 2014 that girls can be married even if they're in the cradle. The Council of Islamic Ideology in Pakistan says Islam does not forbid the marriage of young girls. Abd al-Hamid al-Ubaidi, an Iraqi expert on Islamic law, says there's no minimum marriage age for either men or women. Ishaq Akintola, professor of Islamic eschatology in Nigeria. Islam has no age barrier in marriage, and Muslims have no apology for those who refuse to accept this. I could go on and on and on, but I think the problem Dr. Oz has here is that Kathy Barnett didn't make this up. She has plenty of reason to think that pedophilia is a cornerstone in Islam when you have all these mainstream Muslim clerics saying there's no age limit. You can marry a little baby. Well,
And I mean, I'm thinking in terms of the modern Muslim apologists, how many of them don't defend relationships with 9-year-old girls? How many of them don't? They have to, because that's what their prophet did. You occasionally have a Muslim apologist who just massively lies about the Muslim sources. Even people like Sheikh Yasser Qadi call out those people as liars. They tell them to stop lying about Muhammad. He said that's not how we defend our prophet. But I mean, Muhammad Hijab, Ali Dawa, Sheikh Yasser Qadi, even, I mean, people who are professors, Jonathan Brown defends it. Now, to be clear, Jonathan Brown and Sheikh Yasser Qadi, they don't say that you have to do this today or that this should be okay in the world today, but they at least have to defend it. They do defend it during the time of Muhammad and say it was perfectly acceptable then. They just say that times have changed, and so they view it as an issue where there's wriggle room and you can have cultural relativism. It's there's nothing inherently wrong about it. It's just, we view it as wrong and we're not going to do it now. But then you have plenty of Muslim apologists who would be glad to change that rule and go back to a time when people marry 9-year-old girls, and they actually justify it. They say, well, you're much more likely to avoid sex outside of marriage if you're marrying these girls when they're 9. Then they don't have time to end up fooling around with some guy and so on. So they actually are defending and promoting it. So yeah, the idea that should prohibit you from public office or something like that for just pointing out that there's a problem over here with this ideology. Strange stuff.
Indeed. Unfortunately, there are quite a lot of currents against the freedom of speech nowadays. But anyway, speaking of fooling around with some guy, I have a story out of Sweden. And it's about Shiite imams involved in what is essentially prostitution. As you have noted many times, the Shiite imams will often write out a marriage contract in houses of prostitution, the marriage contract for a mutad, pleasure marriage, a temporary marriage, a marriage with a time limit. And an investigation in Sweden has found that this is actually quite widespread, and that Islamic Shia communities in Sweden are doing this on a rather large scale. There were some, to be sure, that refused. The Swedish broadcaster sent a woman around posing as a Muslim woman who was down on her luck and needed money and offering to become a temporary wife. And to be sure, some of even the Shiite imams turned her away, said this is illegal in Sweden and forbidden in Islam. But there were others who said sure and gave her referrals for where she could get set up in business and so on. Now, this, of course, is completely understandable given the fact that Shiites and some Sunnis as well. I've seen it in Saudi Arabia and Egypt over the years that some Sunnis engage in this as well, based on 424, chapter 4, verse 24 of the Quran, which I happen to have the critical Quran right here. And it says, those whom you enjoy, give them their shares as a duty, and there is no sin for you in what you do by mutual agreement after the duty being the bride price, the payment that you make for the privilege of marrying the woman, and there is no restriction on what you do by agreement after that. The Shiites find in that the permission for temporary marriage. And of course, there are hadiths saying that Muhammad allowed it, hadiths saying Muhammad forbade it, hadiths saying Muhammad didn't forbid it, and so on.
Yeah, and keep in mind, everyone, again, that's very, standard practice in Shia Islam to think that is okay. Even within Sunni Islam, because you'll have Sunnis saying, no, we don't allow that. Everyone agrees that Muhammad allowed it, at least for a while, that this was a normal practice. You're away from your wife, you're traveling and so on, you're away from your wife. What are you going to do? And you go ahead and sign a contract for a temporary marriage. Hey, I'm going to marry you for 3 hours. Give you something, I'm going to pay you, exactly like I would a prostitute. The only difference is it's halal. It's halal prostitution because while I'm having sex with you, we're married for that time. And then as soon as I'm done, hey, we're divorced. No problem. So it's all 100% halal. And as Robert pointed out, you do have hadiths that say that Muhammad eventually forbade the practice. So after a while, he said, okay, let's stop that prostitution thing. But then even within Sunni sources, within mainstream Islam's most trusted Sunni sources, you'll have hadiths. You can find them in Sahih Muslim, for instance. You find hadiths saying that it wasn't actually Muhammad who forbade the practice. It was a later Muslim caliph who forbade the practice. And Muslims continued it during the time of Muhammad and into the time of the caliphs. Then a caliph eventually forbade it, and then it was rewritten back into the Muslim sources that Muhammad forbade it in order to justify condemning the practice. But notice, if you're a Muslim and if you're a Sunni Muslim and you want to practice mutta, you want to go hire a prostitute, what do? Well, I got hadith saying one thing, I've got hadith saying another thing. I get to pick and choose which one I want to believe because they're all sahih. They completely contradict each other, but they're all sahih, so I'm good to go. And so it's if you live in the West and you find that a disgusting practice, right here it says Muhammad forbade it. And if you're in a place where you want to practice mutta, nope, says it was a later caliph. Hey, you can't overrule Allah and Muhammad, so I get to go practice mutta. Strange religion.
Indeed. Hey, David, did you hear about this very strange story out of France? Ahmad Ahmadi?
It's a funny name, though.
Yeah, it's a great name. I'm thinking about going down to the office where you get your name changed. Anyway, Ahmad Ahmadi, he was an imam in France from the Comoros, and he's now been deported back to the Comoros. And I found 2 news stories about this, one in English, one in French. And I still can't believe it. I wonder if there's more to the story that's not being reported. Because Ahmad Ahmadi was deported. And he was deported because he quoted the Quran.
That's weird.
And he didn't even quote one of the passages that calls for violence or wife beating or anything. He quoted this, and stay in your houses. Do not display yourselves with the display of the time of ignorance. Be regular in prayer and give alms and obey Allah and his messenger. That's 33:33, chapter 33, verse 33. And it's directed to women. And apparently French authorities thought that he was preaching the inequality of women with men, which of course he was. And that this was incompatible with French ideals, and consequently he was deported from France. And he said, predictably enough, I have nothing to regret and nothing to apologize for. I have spoken the word of Allah. If I repent, I'm no longer a Muslim. And I think Ahmad Ahmadi, I'm completely with you on that. You're right. All he did was preach the religion that the French had every reason to think that he preached. And what I wonder is, what on earth do the French think the other imams in France are preaching? If they get upset with this guy, upset enough with this guy for preaching the Quran to deport him, despite his magnificent name, and then they think all the rest of the imams are okay? Do they think they're preaching Dr. Seuss? What on earth do they think is going on in these mosques? And they're in for a very rude awakening, because they're going to find that Ahmad Ahmadi was not in the least unusual, and that the kinds of things he was preaching are preached by every imam in every mosque in France every day.
And that reminded me of that clip where a reporter was in Afghanistan. She asked the Taliban jihadis, "Hey, in your new country, would a woman be able to lead?" And they just cracked up laughing. It was a hilarious idea, and they had to tell, "Hey, turn the camera off. Turn the camera off now," right? Because they were just they didn't want to be seen as guys who crack up laughing at stuff. They're trying to be intimidating. But yeah, I mean, I think we're going to see these inevitable conflicts in the future, because everyone, politicians, journalists, educators, entertainers, I mean, their favorite religion in history is just Islam, the way they shower it with praises. And then the moment any Muslim or Muslim imam or whatever says what Islam actually teaches about some of these issues, it's what? That's so intolerant. What are we going to do about this intolerance? And it's like, guys, how can it be your favorite religion when you know absolutely nothing about it, and anytime someone accurately says what it teaches, you freak out? It's gonna be entertaining to watch, because it's going to be inevitable. And it was just a couple of years ago when schools in the UK were surrounded by Muslim protesters for LGBTQ stuff in the schools and so on. So the local Muslims were like, "Hey, yeah, we're all on the same side. We're all buddy. When we're focusing on our common enemies, but wait a minute, now you're going after our kids. We got some problems here." And yeah, conflict is inevitable.
No doubt about that. Speaking of conflict being inevitable, I got a story out of Uganda, and this was actually, it's two separate stories that were put together in one news story for no particular reason, except they both happened recently. A bishop, Amon Siddiqui, was preaching at an open-air evangelistic event and debating Muslims. And he did this for 4 days. And at the end of the 4 days, 11 Muslims converted to Christianity, whereupon 2 motorcycles showed up, 3 riders each. That is the hallmark of jihadis in Nigeria as well as elsewhere in Africa. This, once again, is Uganda. 3 riders on the motorcycle. One of them is driving, the other 2 get off and start shooting. And in this case, they got off screaming Allahu Akbar, started to stab Siddiqui with knives. He was severely injured, but there were people around. They were able to get him away. Meanwhile, in southern Uganda, a church was burned to the ground by Muslims setting the church on fire, and once again for the same reason, that Muslims were converting to Christianity. And so conflict is inevitable indeed, as you noted, because Christianity is a faith that is preached, and Islam is a faith that is preached. But Islam has a death penalty prohibition on other faiths being preached. And so conflict is inevitable, and there'll be many more stories, unfortunately, like those 2 out of Uganda.
Yeah, and part of it is, we talk. I talk a lot on my channel about the avalanche of apostasy, because I mean, that's not a term we came up with. It's Muslims calling it the avalanche of apostasy. When this, even several years ago, so when they had the statistic for 24% of Muslim youth leaving Islam, so it's in the 24 to 25%. An estimated 5% of Muslims even in Muslim majority countries are actually closet atheists who just don't feel safe to come out and proclaim their apostasy. I've seen Ali Dawa say 100,000 Muslims are leaving Islam every year. He was actually he actually didn't quote that accurately. It was 100,000 Muslims in the United States leaving Islam every year, so just in the U.S. And so you have this apostasy starting to accelerate and ramp up very, very rapidly, and some people are just going into a kind of panic mode, like it must be because we're doing something wrong, that we're not following Islam properly to stop this apostasy. And one of the bad reactions they're having from that is, especially in places like Africa and Pakistan and so on, is they're thinking we have to become more violent in threatening anyone who criticizes our religion. We have to silence people who criticize our religion. We have to silence anyone who's presenting an alternative to Islam. We have to crack down on killing apostates and so on. And so that's the negative side. So the good thing is lots of people are leaving Islam. The bad side is it's making a lot of people more violent about preserving their religion.
That's wild. That's fascinating. More people are leaving, and so we have to get meaner. It reminds me of Qaradawi. You know Sheikh Qaradawi, the TV preacher, probably the most prominent Muslim cleric in the world. He's very old now, though, and he said a few years ago, if it weren't for the apostasy law, Islam would not exist today.
He's right about
in other
that.
words, we didn't kill you for leaving. Everybody would have left already.
He's got that right. Because people aren't staying for that perfect preservation of the Quran, let me say.
That's for sure. Okay, one last before we go out of the Palestinian Authority, Palestinian Islamic scholar, Mohammed Afif Shadid. He was speaking not long ago. He said, "We were expelled from Palestine 8 decades ago," which is not actually historically true, but whatever. Not the point right now. "We will return to it, to every inch of it, not only to the homes which we left, carrying the house keys and nothing else. This is a reduction of our right. As the nation of Muhammad, we have the right to Palestine in its entirety." And I thought that was interesting because, you know, people talk about the Israeli-Palestinian conflict solely in political terms, and never has the fact that Islam has a lot to do with it ever entered into negotiations or any considerations on the part of politicians. But the Muslims have always been forthright that their claims to the area are based on Islam. So anyway, he goes on, he says, "Every grain of its soil, every drop of its water, every whiff of its air, but that's not all. Palestine should be a center, a capital, and a starting point for conquering the world. Our sympathizers in the world, as well as our enemies, should know that the cause of our right of return does not pertain only to Palestine. The whole world is our battlefield. Our goal is not to liberate Palestine alone, but to liberate this sick world and deliver it from darkness to light."
Yep, and I think if you didn't have a bunch of people who demand the complete annihilation of the opposition, there would be I think there would have been that two-state solution a long, long time ago.
Yep. The only people who didn't want it were the ones who were intransigent in their insistence that there could be no Jewish state, and there could be no Jewish state because the Quran says drive them out from where they drove you out, and so on.
And I actually I was over in Israel a couple of years ago and listening to a security expert over there talking about explaining the situation that even the people who aren't demanding the complete annihilation of Israel and want a two-state solution. They clearly will never actually go for it, because they'll demand things that can't possibly be granted. And so it's been a situation over and over again of, okay, here's your demands. We're willing to grant you 97% of your demands, but you can't have that hill right there where you can drop bombs on this Jewish village right here. You can't have that. You can't have that. So you can have the next hill over, but not that hill. And it's been no, unless we get 100% of everything we demand. And it's clear that the leaders are just using that because they don't ever want any sort of situation where people could think of this as a situation where peace can be achieved. They want an eternal bloodbath.
And to conquer the world, as Muhammad Afif Shadid has said. This, of course, is also based on the Quran. Fight them until persecution is no more, which sounds defensive, and religion is all for Allah, which can only be offensive, which is 2193, 839.
Yep. I'm going to take one question here before we sign out. AB says, what do you think about the response? Everyone wants to subjugate people they don't agree with. Islam is the only religion that admits it. I've been pondering this after watching some of that debate. There we're talking about human nature, right? It's sort of human nature, if you get into a position of power, that you try to maintain that power and control over other people. That doesn't mean it's right, or that you're on the right side or something like that. We're saying it's pretty natural. Hey, I've got power. Now let me maintain that power. Never let other people get in a position where they could take me out. And we've seen human beings do that for a long, long time. What you do is you recognize that is an ongoing thing that human beings want to do. Just like there are lots of people that, if you gave them the opportunity, would rape or kill someone. You have to be aware that there are people like that. And once you understand that there are people who are like that, you take steps to make sure that they're not in a situation to do those kinds of things. And so you take steps to limit people's ability to oppress other people and to suppress other people's views and to suppress criticism and so on. So you try to come up with agreements. You try to come up with setups in the government, like the United States, where it's very difficult for one group to actively just shut down and silence other people, understanding that people are still going to try to do it, but you try to make it very, very difficult, if you can't make it actually impossible to do that. The problem with Islam is Islam actually actively calls for it and demands it. One ideology has to be imposed on the entire world. You either accept it or you're a second-class citizen and you're a dhimmi and you're subjugated, and those are the only two options. So we take something that is Islam takes something that is a negative aspect of a human being, and glorifies it and says it's now from God. God wants you to do it. And that is horrifying. So hopefully that answers your question. What's that?
And that's not the only time that a base impulse is taken by Islam and said, God wants you to do this.
Oh, Islam does it with all of them, right? Oh, you want to hire prostitutes? You want notice everything, right? Everything that Islam condemns. Yeah, everything that Islam condemns about the West, right? Oh, look at these guys going around having sex with all these women. Well, my goodness, I can have 4 wives. I can trade those wives out regularly, and I can have an unlimited number of sex slaves. And going with certain interpretations of the Hadith, I can hire prostitutes and so on. I can do it all, and it's all halal. So I get to have sex with as many different women as I want in your religion. I just have to do it in Allah's way. And as you've pointed out, I mean, stealing, robbery, slave trading, slave driving, all of this, beating your wife into submission, every horrible thing human beings could do, and that one group wants to do to another. Islam says it's all halal as long as you're doing it for Allah and in the name of Allah. And so it's like Muhammad just woke up and said, hey, here's every horrible desire a human being can have. Let's turn it into a big religion. and wow, so shocking that it spreads rapidly when you tell guys, hey, every perverted thing you want is actually okay, including having sex with little girls. It's all halal now. It's great. Prostitution, everything. It's all great. Really? Let's convert to that religion. It's so wonderful. Wow. All right, well, we've gone slightly over there because of my rant at the end. Again, Robert, where are you going to be after this? I'll add a link if you find a link to I can add it to the comment
Yeah,
section.
I'm zeroing in TNT Radio, and it's Joseph Arthur coming up at 9 o'clock Eastern. And so,
It's
yeah, I'll send you that right away.
all right. So thanks, Robert, for joining us. Thanks, everyone, for joining us a little earlier than normal because Robert has another show. And I'm assuming that we'll be back, unfortunately, next week with more in Jihad. Talk to you then.